Hey everybody, Onepeg here, sporting a nice little short starter mohawk because I'm still a junior high kid on the inside and refuse to grow up. So today there was a Russian language devblog podcast, and thanks to folks like Sneaky Russian 007 and Reddit, we have some translations that I can share with you. There is a piece of information in here that looks like it could be pretty rough for a lot of people, especially if you have friends that are less experienced and you've kind of been funneling them gear, but I'll get to that in a minute. So the podcast began with Nikita giving a brief summary of kind of where they're at. They said that they're trying to push out the 12.7 update. Nikita said with this, there's going to be an awful lot of new stuff, new guns, new equipment for the guns, a customs expansion, a new boss, Sanator in the Shoreline Resort, and they're also talking about reworking a large part of customs. And we know that already they're looking at fixing the lighting and certain aspects of that map to kind of coincide with what they did in Reserve and Labs with volumetric lighting effects, etc. What's interesting about this is Nikita said that we can actually expect to see patch notes for 12.7 as early as next week. So we're looking at a handful of days, and we should have patch notes kind of after the Independence Day holiday. By the way, happy Independence Day for those of you in the United States that celebrate it. He said that right now they're working on finalizing the voice work for the boss. And that today they upgraded the servers with a new patch that he said should end up fixing a whole lot of desync issues. And once 12.7 is implemented, he said that their focus is then going to shift to Streets of Tarkov. Now, there was a question about how Reserve works as it pertains to customs and the rework, meaning that there are some different mechanics on Reserve for things like windows and bushes. The question was, is that going to also be in customs or not once this new expansion goes in? Nikita said he wasn't sure if it was going to be implemented on customs or not, but he would look into it, make a note, and check back. But he did make it a point to say that the expansion of customs was going to make customs great again. Nice meme. The podcast and the conversation then shifted to a conversation about the economy. And they wanted to know specifically why the flea market and the changes with the economy have gone the way that they did. The majority of the hardcore player base, or the people that have an awful lot of hours, tend to think that this isn't necessarily a bad thing for them. And it's not. I mean, when you have thousands of hours in the game, it's not really a problem. But again, that issue doesn't necessarily translate well to people that are brand new. As we've already seen and discussed, there's an awful lot of people on places like Reddit that dislike these changes. So what Nikita had to say was, first of all, a large majority of the changes that have been implemented to the economy were things that they already had planned on doing to begin with. So they returned to the concept of find and raid status. For instance, that was something that they had already wanted to do. It wasn't exactly planned to be like this, but Nikita went on to say that the RMT, or real money traders, kind of ruining the economy and promoting botting of the game, using things like aimbot and radar, made it more hardcore than they had originally planned it to be before. He said that right now the game is a little bit more like a sandbox, and they're still trying to experiment with certain things, but the concept is to make it more hardcore even than it already is now. He plans on in the future adding some more restrictions that will end up slowing us down and making things even more frustrating, which personally I'm fine with. But I know that a lot of the player base is going to have an issue with this, which kind of goes back to the whole thing of Nikita saying that Tarkov isn't supposed to be fun, right? And then one of the streamers ended up asking the question of, okay, well, if the game's currently at 100%, what percentage of hardcore would you expect that percentage to increase to? Nikita didn't really give a straight answer to this. He just said it's going to be more hardcore. So I guess we'll see. Question then came up about dynamic loot and wanting to see kind of where the progression was in the roadmap toward whether or not dynamic loot was going to be a thing and when. Nikita said that there's a lot of mechanics that needed to be implemented first before they could get to dynamic loot. From patch to patch, he said that they changed locations from where you can find expensive loot, so you need to search for it over and over again. It's not automated. They're kind of replacing where those items are being hand-placed, and you kind of have to rediscover where that distribution is going to be. I think the plan is at some point they're going to make it like an automated process, but for now it seems like it's a much more hands-on thing for the devs. From here, the conversation shifted to one that was more about weaponry, and specifically the Val and VSS. And the question was, why does the Val and VSS continuously get nerfed? And Nikita's simple answer was, well, that's the meta gun. And because it's the meta gun, and because it's being overwhelmingly used, we needed to do something about it to kind of bring it in closer line to other things. Now, obviously, the argument could be made there's always going to be a meta gun. There's really no way to get around that. There's always going to be meta builds, things that tend to outperform others, because that's just how the game will progress over time. So between nerfing the gun's inherent recoil, also adding recoil penalties to certain types of ammo that you can use, and restricting the amount of ammo that people can buy, those things kind of added all together ended up making it more of a niche gun than it was a simple go-to for cheap. Nikita then went on to say that right now in the game, there's about 1,000 weapon mods. And what they plan on doing is adding another 3,000. So right now we have like a quarter of the amount of weapon mods that they plan on implementing, which is crazy. I mean, the amount of stuff that you're going to be able to do, the weapon modding in this game is already nuts, but another 3,000 accessories is like just wow, you know? So on Instagram today, they had posted this photo of the 338 Lapua, at least most of it. So the question was, okay, well, when is this going to be implemented in the game? What are you planning on? Nikita said that the new gun, the 338 sniper rifle, will not be implemented before 12.8. So it's going to come sometime after that. But there's also other guns that are being planned that they haven't necessarily teased yet. He said that there's also going to be different barrels for different guns being released in the future. Bipods for those guns will not necessarily be released anytime soon because they said that they have a lot of other more important things to work on right now than implementing other weapon mechanics. He even went so far as to say when it gets around to the point where they start doing things like bipods, modifying bolts, changing the caliber of the chassis of the rifle that you're using, that will probably end up being a larger expansion as part of a DLC specifically tailored towards sniping. Meaning that there's going to be additional mechanics, a new trader, long-range shooting range, things like that. But they don't have an ETA on it as of yet. The conversation then shifted to Terra Group Labs and how the plan was to access Terra Group Labs from Streets. And Nikita actually expanded upon this and said that it won't just be accessible from Streets. It's actually going to be accessible from Streets, from Customs, and from Fact, and maybe even potentially some other maps. Now, we know that Labs is kind of centrally located around Streets, and maybe there's some longer tunnels that kind of lead into this place. The idea would be is that you have to go into one of these maps, work your way over to the Labs entrance, swipe your key card, get into Labs, and then you enter a matchmaking queue, kind of holding you in limbo. He even went so far as to say that it's going to be possible that you could end up in a match against people that are zoning into Labs from various other maps kind of around the same time. I think that this is going to end up being something that could be potentially problematic if you're in a matchmaking queue to try and get into Labs against other people that have to kind of get around the doors to go into Labs around the same time, or if it's going to end up being this graduated process with maybe a much longer amount of time given to actually be in the lab. I'm not sure exactly how this will work. I think the player base as a whole would have to get a lot larger in order for this to kind of be a rather consistent revolving door where, you know, things like ping and ping restrictions aren't going to be a problem. The question then went toward wipes and whether or not there would be a wipe in 12.7. Now, I think this would be a little bit too soon or premature for there to be a wipe in 12.7. And Nikita said no, you could probably expect to see this somewhere around 12.9 or 13, probably around when Streets ends up being released. The question then shifted to the new Unity engine, because now there's obviously a newer version of Unity out there, and whether or not Tarkov is going to implement it in, say, 12.8. Nikita said that the plan was to try to use the new Unity engine in 12.8 and move along with that. But what they were going to do is take a select group of players, possibly streamers, and put them onto some type of test realm to be able to test the new engine and see if there's any bugs and what they can do with it. Now that, I think, is a fantastic idea. The next question was asked about Steam Audio and when the next module of Steam Audio would get implemented. Nikita said it's been postponed because right now it's a little bit too CPU intensive. People wanted to know if Streets of Tarkov would have an underground like Reserve, and he said yes, but it's probably going to be like building basements, and he wasn't going to elaborate on that anymore. Now again, Nikita doesn't necessarily know all the intricacies of these maps. In the last English podcast, he said specifically that he didn't want to know everything so that he could still be surprised by some things. And he's kind of letting the map designers do what they feel is appropriate as map design. Sure, he probably has the final say, but it's something that he gets to discover maybe just slightly in front of us. Now, the question then turned to things like cheats, desync, and other forms of hacks. And Nikita said that they've destroyed the radar cheat and said now the ball is basically in the hack maker's court. He also said that after today's update to expect a decrease in desync, which I had already mentioned, and what he said to this effect was that they've lost 3 months of developmental progress because of having to combat real money trading and people cheating in the game. So we, as the player base, could thank all of the cheaters for having set them back and have to focus on fixing the shitty gameplay stuff that people have been trying to do to gain that competitive edge. So let me be the first person to say, F you, you cheating pieces of shit. Now, in terms of animation mechanics, the question was asked when vaulting would be added to the game. If obviously anyone that's played this game for more than 5 minutes can attest, we don't have the ability to just vault over barriers. We have to jump over them, which is obviously unnatural in terms of what people would be doing. Nikita said that they already have some of the animations done, but insofar as when we can expect it, he doesn't have an ETA on this as of yet. So it's not going to be soon, I guess. I guess this would fall under not so soon. Then the question about 7N21 ammo for 9x19 and whether or not that was going to be added and whether or not it was planned. And Nikita said yes. He said if he was right, it's coming in 12.7. So we could see the 7N21 ammo variant for 9x19, which would be pretty nice. And then the last couple of questions that kind of came up before we get to the most major thing is PMC faces and whether or not they're going to be customizable or if we can choose from different ones. He said, yes, you'll be able to do that when you get to character creation at some point in the future. There's going to be a cosmetic update. And the last one was whether or not we would be able to relock doors when they close. And obviously that's something that is planned, but he hasn't given us an ETA on that either. Now, if I was going to bet on one other piece of this, it would be when are we going to see cultists? And I think that the best point in time that they could possibly be implementing this is when they add this next major update that includes Sanator and everything else. If they're going to revamp customs and they're going to add a new scav boss, I think it would be pertinent for them to start looking at adding cultists in around that point in time. It seems like it would fit really, really well, especially since Nikita has been touting that they've been pretty much done with him for quite a while. This would kind of make sense if they end up doing it. But again, we know that Nikita loves to troll, so it very well possibly could be they just slip it in there with some rando point update that says that they're taking the servers down for maintenance, and then we end up getting shivved with poison dagger. So who knows? The last thing that I wanted to talk about today was this larger final question that has to do with RMT, or real money trading. Now, there's been an awful lot of reports from people saying that they were falsely banned because of these RMT bans for apparently using or utilizing real money trading, but they weren't, according to them, doing any real money trading. Even so far as Anton, who was banned yesterday for a short time, was part of that ban wave. Now, obviously, Anton isn't taking part of, any kind of RMT trading. That's ridiculous. He doesn't need any help making money. I mean, even though the guy can't aim for anything. I'm kidding. Anton's a fantastic content creator. He's also a fantastic player of the game. He's really, really good, as much shit as people want to give him. He's way better than I am, but that, of course, isn't saying much. In the case of somebody like Anton being banned, obviously that was done falsely. And the reason why is because at some point along the line, he ended up looting items that were flagged for being potential RMT items. So it's possible he could have stopped a trade in progress where people were getting items to sell off for cash that they had purchased, or he had just kind of come along a couple of dead bodies and pulled some cash or items with high value off of them. We aren't obviously sure. There's no way to know for certain, but it seems like he kind of got scooped up in that. And the question about this was, okay, well, why are these people getting banned? And here is what Nikita had to say. He has the ability to track what's going on. And because they can track what's going on, they don't necessarily know the difference between a buddy of yours that's handing you gear and items for, some high amount of value, or if you're somebody that is actually purchasing these things to resell to traders because you gave a website $50. So what he said was, if you don't want to get caught up in these bans, stop giving items to your friends. He acknowledged that there were some false positive bans, but he said the majority of these upvoted threads on Reddit for people to say that they got banned unjustly were complete bullshit. He said that some of them were like 8 raids in a row of them giving flash drives to their friends, and obviously that doesn't make a whole lot of sense. And what he had to say to that was, if you're making these Reddit threads, you need to stop lying and ruining the game because this is not real. You guys are lying through your teeth. What he said to do instead was, if you're trying to help them complete quests, run with them on these raids and help them survive. If there's loot to be found, help them find the loot. Don't just go into raids and hand them a bunch of stuff and say, okay, here you go, and that's how you're going to help them. Because that could potentially end up getting them flagged if it ends up being a repeat process for large amounts of rubles. As time has gone on, we have seen them further and further restrict valuables and how many of them you're able to trade or even carry on you inside of a raid. Things like keys, Bitcoin, GP coin, other valuable items. And the idea was, you have these smaller single slot items that have high retail values to traders, and in doing so, you can trade them in mass to other people in the game by just dropping them on the ground. People can collect them, put them in their gamma container, and then you can just do the rinse and repeat. Well, that stuff is getting noticed, and that's kind of the point. So to clarify this a little bit more, the way that it looks is if you're going to give your buddy an AK and some armor, that's not necessarily a big deal. But if you're planning on dropping them a Red Rebel or 2 or 3, then that's obviously going to get flagged. And I think the cutoff is going to be kind of akin to the idea of if over the course of a short amount of time, you're handing somebody tens of millions of rubles worth of stuff, that's obviously going to get flagged by this RMT bot that they have kind of watching everything. If you're just handing somebody some gear in a bag, that may not necessarily be as problematic. Also, he went on further to say that it's also possible there could be a false ban that ends up arriving because you as a player just happen to be on a map where RMT is going on. Thankfully, Pestily was able to clarify this a little bit with him and ask the question, and it turns out that it's only if you end up being in a team with somebody that is flagged as being an RMT participant. So this really seems like it might have a little bit of conflicting information involved in this. But now as a streamer, what we end up having to look out for on our end of the community are things like gift kits, because it very well possibly could be that there's somebody that's participated in RMT or just wants to see the world burn, and they say, hey, would you like me to give you a kit of gear? And you say, sure, and the backpack has one of every variety of Labski in it. In that case, because of the large value of items that was just exchanged in, between two people, that could potentially look like the flagging for RMT. So it seems like the foreseeable future, unfortunately, in cases like guys like myself that tend to end up having fun getting handed things like meme kits, we either have to completely stop doing it or be extremely, extremely careful about whether or not we're going to accept things from people inside of raids. Because if we do, and people end up being RMT participants, or even if we just end up getting arbitrarily flagged based on the large value of items that were being handed by people, that could end up ruining our gaming experience and, in my case, the ability to end up earning a living just because I'm trying to have fun with my viewers, which sucks. Hopefully they can fix this, because obviously I love participation. Shit's fun. Anyway, guys, that's what I have for you. I hope you don't mind my rambling. Thank you so much for taking the time to hang out for this little video. Looking super forward to that update, man. The customs expansion is going to be sweet. And I'll see you in the next one, okay?